Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathy Maceda. I'm the Executive Director of ABAC for 2015, and I'm happy to have been given this opportunity to bring along members of course, the ABAC delegation and key delegates to the regional conference we conducted this morning and this afternoon. First off, I'd like to call on Mr. Anthony Nightingale. He's an ABAC member from Hong Kong, China, Director of Jardine Matheson Holdings Limited. Mr. Nightingale is here as head of ABAC delegation to attend the structural reform ministerial meeting. He is also director of Dairy Farm Hong Kong Land, Jardine Cycle and Carriage, Jardine Strategic and Mandarin Oriental, and Commissioner of Astra International. He is the director of UK ASEAN Business Council and chairman of the Hong Kong APEC Trade Policy Study Group. Anthony, could you please say a few words? Thank you.
Do you want me to come up? Thanks, Kathy, and good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see you here. We've just come hot foot from this services conference that Kathy was talking about, which really consisted of two parts. In the morning, it was a regular conference. We had some excellent presentations about services. I'll touch a little bit on that in a moment. And then in the afternoon, a number of the delegates who come from services coalitions from around the APEC economies join together, put their heads together and say, how can we put this work together more effectively going forward? How can we work together? How can we promote services? And the decision that came out at the end of the day was that we will form an Asia-Pacific Services Coalition of the people that were there today, and we'll try and draw in the other APEC economies, a handful of which were not able to attend this time. So that was the big conclusion of the meeting. This is an important step for furthering services liberalization and facilitation in the region. It was held, as Kathy mentioned, on the margins of the ministerial meeting, the APEC ministerial meeting on structural reform, the first meeting that's been held on structural reform for 7 years. And it's very appropriate, because many of the issues which service companies, service providers face are issues closely related with structural reform. They relate to regulation. They're behind the border issues rather than at the border issues in trade parlance. Now, the Asia-Pacific, or rather I should say the APEC, Business Advisory Council, or ABAC, has been pushing the cause of services quite hard for the last few years. But this year, we've been fortunate to have a real boost from APEC under the Philippine chairmanship. The Philippines has chosen to make services a key focus of its activity for the year, inside, of course, the theme of inclusive economic growth. But the Philippines has recognized, as you know, we devoutly believe ourselves, that aiding the development of service industries and small and medium enterprises, or now we call them micro, small and medium enterprises engaged in the service sector, is a really important part of delivering inclusive growth. Why are services important? I would think maybe to an audience here in the Philippines, I don't have to say any reason why. Services is a critical part of the economy here. Globally, they're some 70% of GDP. So one might ask, why have services not received greater attention so far? In a way, it's because they're much more difficult to get hold of in trade negotiations than, for example, talking about export of manufactured goods or even agriculture or mining products. The other reason why services are so important, of course, is that efficient services affect all areas of economic activity. Put it the other way round. If you have inefficient, uncompetitive, overprotected service industries, that leads to higher costs. That means your manufacturing products will be more expensive, your mining products, your agricultural products. So uncompetitive services leads to uncompetitive exports, bad for the export industries, bad for the country, and bad for the country's consumers. I mentioned that we've had a real assist this year from the Philippines in pushing the cause of services. To be concrete about that, they've already held a couple of conferences. We call them public-private dialogues between government officials and the private sector on certain specific aspects of services, and now it's culminated in this conference today. At the same time, the Philippines is working in an APEC context about producing the APEC Services Cooperation Framework. Have I got that title right, Kathy? Thank you, yes. Which is a very important initiative, again, promoting opening of services that ABAC is firmly behind. I mentioned that as a result of today's meeting, the Asia Pacific Services Coalition is up and running, and its next meeting will be in Beijing in May. I think I'll pause there and hand the floor to Jane Drake Brockman. You're going to introduce Jane properly. I might just say in the beginning that Jane has been a tireless warrior on behalf of services for many, many years, long before it became fashionable.
Thank you, Anthony. Next to speak is Jane Drake Brockman, a consistent partner of ABAC in its work on the New Services Agenda. Jane is Senior Services Advisor of the International Trade Center, which essentially is a UN body. She heads the services program at ITC. She has a unique combination of deep trade, in-services experience in business, academia, government, and trade-related technical assistance. She was the founder and inaugural CEO of the Australian Services Roundtable, as well as board member of the International Chamber of Commerce in Australia. Jane, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm from the International Trade Center, which is based in Geneva. It's a United Nations agency that works with small and medium-sized enterprises to help them build their competitiveness. And we've been very pleased to work this year with the APEC Business Advisory Council and also specifically with the Philippine Services Coalition, because we really believe that the services sector holds big prospects for growth in this part of the world. We believe that the services sector is so closely linked to efficiency in all of the other sectors that ultimately, if you want to be competitive in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, mining, manufacturing these days, you have to make sure that the services inputs are efficient. And we held today the first ever regional conference of services organizations from all around the APEC region. They all came to Cebu today to participate in this meeting. And in the afternoon, the business organizations met on their own without APEC senior officials. And a very exciting development took place because they agreed to launch an Asia-Pacific Services Coalition. So this new business organization now exists. It's very large. It's probably now the world's largest coalition of services champions. It will be feeling its way towards engaging in APEC processes, particularly when the Philippines manages to shepherd through at the end of this year the new services cooperation framework, which really delivers an agenda that business can get its teeth into. It's a very inclusive SME agenda, and there is much work to be done. So it's very exciting. The group exists, has agreed to meet again on May 28 in Beijing, and there is much work to be done between now and then. There were many business organisations here participating in this meeting, where the Indonesia Services Dialogue, the Malaysian Services Providers Federation, the Australian Services Roundtable, the Canadian Services Coalition, the Singapore Business Federation, the Lima Chamber of Commerce. The list goes on and on and on. From so many APEC economies, business representatives came to Cebu, and here in the Philippines they have launched something that's a small step forward but will grow into something that we in the ITC think is quite an extraordinary step forward. So congratulations to the APEC Business Advisory Council. We've thoroughly enjoyed working with you to help bring this about.
Thank you, Jane. Indeed, the establishment of the Asia-Pacific Services Coalition is a major milestone realized during the Philippine chairmanship of APEC. Next in our panel, this gentleman needs not much introduction. Peter Perfecto, of course, everyone knows he's the executive director of the Makati Business Club. He serves as the president of Integrity Initiative Incorporated, and he's now the director of the Revitalized Philippine Services Coalition. Peter, please.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you to our other speakers. I'd just like to share and to say to Cebu this evening that you have reason to be proud, because many years from now, when the services agenda, when trade in services across the APEC region is reaping all the benefits, is creating inclusive growth, people will remember Cebu 2015, the Asia-Pacific Services Coalition was born. So I think that's one of the things that the APEC brings to Cebu, that you will be remembered many years forward. And then you can tell your kids that once upon a time, you helped make the APEC meeting a success, and because of that success, the Asia-Pacific Services Coalition was born. Because I can assure you that years from now, I think the coalition will be able to show that indeed inclusive growth can happen when the business sector, government, and the other stakeholders come together and put their minds to a common agenda. The Philippine Services Coalition also has been revitalized, and we chose also this meeting in Cebu to announce our coming out again. A long time ago in 2004, there was an effort to set up the Philippine Services Coalition, and then recently in 2014, PCCI, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce, and Makati Business Club came together, started some discussions, but really it's only at this meeting, at this APEC 2015 here in Cebu, that we're coming out and again informing everybody that the Philippine Services Coalition is alive and well. MBC and PCCI will start the secretariat, and we are inviting all services associations, groups, organizations to join us. Already from this meeting, already 5 organizations have said we want to be part of the Philippine Services Coalition. So maraming salamat, Cebu. You have helped make this thing happen.
Thank you, Peter. You will all be provided a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding that was adopted this afternoon, together with a press release coming from the group. But for now, I'd like to open the floor for questions that you might have. Please state your name and your media organization and indicate who you would like to answer those questions. Yes, we're pleased to have with us also the president of the U.S. Services Coalition and of course the head of the Indonesia Services Coalition. They're both here to lend support so that if you have questions, they could also answer those. Shall we have the first question? Yes, sir.
Ted Torres, Philippine Star. I'd like to find out what will the framework look like? And the second question will probably be, who will head the regional coalition?
Jane?
Well, first of all, as far as the new coalition is concerned, it will be co-convened initially for the first step in this process by the Australian Services Roundtable and the United States Coalition of Services Industries, with support from the Philippine Services Coalition and the Lima Chamber of Commerce. Next year, APEC will be hosted by Peru, and it's very important for building momentum and continuity in this new organization that the Peruvian business community is engaged. And we have the Chinese Association for Trade and Services will be hosting the next meeting. So it's a real collaboration between many organizations. It has support from the PECC, which will help with providing some of the evidence base that industry needs to articulate its case, and also from the APEC Business Advisory Council. So it is anchored initially in this, it will operate more or less initially virtually until its next meeting, but work will start on how industry wants to engage with this new framework. So the second question was, what are the elements of that framework? And I will leave most of that question to Anthony Nightingale, but I would say one thing that's very important for industry, and that is that the heart of this new framework is a services competitiveness roadmap for APEC. Now, that requires each APEC economy to also work on services competitiveness. So that is the real meat in the business agenda. It's trade, investment, innovation, people movement, talent, the vast number of issues that impact on services growth.
Anthony's answer will essentially reflect the business sentiment, what it wants to see in the framework. This is not exactly what will be in the framework because it's still being negotiated. So Anthony, please.
Well, thanks, Kathy. But I think actually Jane's expressed it very well. I mean, the elements that that make up the framework that we want are basically an opening of services regimes, cooperation between governments in harmonizing regulation where possible, assisting labor mobility, whether it's helping lower skilled labor or whether it's helping the corporate worker wanting or a corporation wanting to move a senior, a middle or junior executive from one country to another. And perhaps just some basic principles that when we talk to government about regulation, we, of course, there's a lot of detail, and each particular industry has its own characteristics. But what we're looking for is some basic principles. We're looking for transparency in government regulation. We're looking for simplicity. We're looking for consistency and predictability. We say consistency in the application of those regulations. We're looking at fairness, which of course means a level playing field. And we're looking for speed, because at the end of the day, time is money, and particularly for small and medium enterprises, when they get faced with difficult regulations, unreasonable regulations, or long delays, it's very tough for them to deal with bureaucracies. So those 5 principles that I announced or enunciated, those are the ones we would like governments to bear in mind when they form their regulations and implement them.
Next question, please. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Guy Ordinario from Business Mirror. I just wanted to ask regarding the coalition, the regional coalition. What can we expect from the coalition in the near to the medium term? And then for the Philippines coalition, can you identify the 5 organizations that have already signified interest to join?
Maybe Jane, you might want to start off first, and Anthony and Peter.
Well, I would just say from the point of view of the International Trade Centre, the big objective here is to really boost development in the APEC region. The services sector offers tremendous opportunities for poverty reduction and inclusive growth in local communities and across all sectors of the economy. So what we in the ITC hope to see, and why we are so supportive of this business thrust, is because we believe that the services sector growth will really pay off in terms of increased development and poverty alleviation.
Anthony?
Yeah, just adding to that, I mean, there are a lot of different organizations, ABAC, ITC, and others around the world working on the opening of services and services facilitation. But this particular group now is bringing together people in Asia Pacific. And when we bring them together like that, what we're hoping for is another strong voice on behalf of services, and also a sharing of best practice, a sharing of problems, which can lead also to finding a solution, something that's worked in one economy and might work in another. And I think this will be the first time, or this is the first time, that we've ever actually been able to pool together these services coalitions who are all themselves working on behalf of their own companies in the service sector. This is the first time we've pulled them together. So it's a big step.
Peter?
Yes, on the other groups, no, those that attended here, we had folks from the creative sector, and their association would like to join. We have Baliwag University, although she approached us saying that she'd like to try to bring in some of the education associations, and then the Philippine Technological Council, as well as the United Architects of the Philippines. They've all expressed interest to be invited to the meeting that is being organized probably for the end of this month. Aside from that, we are of course taking this up with the Philippine Business Group's Joint Foreign Chambers, who are also keenly interested in finding out what the agenda will be and how they can all support.
Thank you. Yes, follow-up question.
For Mr. Perfecto, the Philippines has been criticized in a sense that it has not been able to fully revive its manufacturing sector, and several economists have already said that we are too focused on services. And then now we have this coalition. So is the Philippines, how can the Philippines take advantage of this coalition, and what can it bring to the economy so that it will not hinder the development of other sectors?
You know, I'm sure that my colleagues here will also have a lot of that they can share with you about that. But let me just say that we all know what the problems are in manufacturing in the country: infrastructure, cost of power, things that we can, I think at this stage, when I think about it, in the medium term, we can already expect that we'll be able to address it. In fact, there has been a resurgence already of manufacturing, and we just have to continue to build on what this administration has been able to put forward, as well as the strengthening of the Philippine business groups and joint foreign chambers. Now, aside from that, though, there is a overlap of services when it comes to making manufacturing more competitive as well as agriculture more competitive. Services, increasing performance of services, increasing innovation in services will actually also redound to benefits for manufacturing and agriculture. My colleagues here can actually also discuss some of that.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Well, I hesitate to say something too much about the Philippines because all of you will know more about it than me, but I'd like to actually just make 2 points. First of all, one of the great successes of a liberalization or an opening is when the Philippine government decided some years ago to liberalize the telecom sector. Some of you may remember what telephone reception, telecommunications used to be like in this country. It was a big, big problem. But more than just fixing that by introducing competition, opening the market, which of course is good for consumers, it was that created the BPO industry, which now accounts for what, some 10% of GDP? Anyway, it is a huge provider. So it's a big success story. And of course, it's nice to have a balanced economy and to have some manufacturing also, though I have to say I come from an economy, Hong Kong, which has lost all its manufacturing, and we still manage to prosper. But the big point is that if you have efficient and competitive services in areas like logistics, in areas like telecom, power distribution, you can list out a huge number. It actually will make your manufacturing industry more efficient too. So the two things are not incompatible. They in fact go together.
Jane, you want to say something?
Well, I would add that the Philippines might have been criticized domestically with respect to the manufacturing sector, but it's certainly been applauded also for its remarkable success in the services sector. There are many other economies that look jealously on at what the Philippines has achieved. And I would say that the prospects for job growth are greater in the services sector. That is, the global evidence is there that this is the sector which in the future will employ more people. And I think it's worth adding to Anthony's remarks that nearly 30% on average and of most manufactured goods is actually services content. So if you get the efficiency of your services inputs right, you can boost the competitiveness, you can rescue declining competitiveness in manufacturing. And the more advanced the manufacturing, the higher the services content. So in some of the high-tech areas, it's up well over 70–80% is services, not goods. And I think we were reminded this morning in our conference that we have to be focused on the future and not on the past, and that we are in the midst now of a services revolution in which the internet is changing everything, and we need to grasp those future opportunities.
Next question, please. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Mads Miraflor of Manila Bulletin. I just want to know who actually spearheaded the idea of the creation of the coalition, and what were the challenges faced before finally having it now. Thank you.
Jane?
It was the idea came first in discussions in ABAC, the APEC Business Advisory Council, and a couple of the people who were very involved in the early stage of those discussions was Jane, sitting beside me, and David Parsons of ABAC Indonesia, sitting in the front row over there. But we had that idea, and some work was done on mapping services coalitions around the APEC region. But it also needed the strong enthusiasm and support of the Philippine government, who embraced this idea and helped us make it happen this year.
Next question. Yes, please.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ben De Vera from Philippine Daily Inquirer. What do you think are the barriers to growth in terms of the services sector in the Asia-Pacific region? And for the newly formed Asia-Pacific Services Coalition, what do you think could you recommend to remove these barriers? Even Secretary Balisacan, during his address early this morning, mentioned of the behind-the-border barriers. How do you think can we bring them down so that the services sector can flourish in the region?
Okay, I'd like Anthony to answer first, and maybe Jane can.
Yeah, I'll answer very generally, and then Jane can give you some color. But it's good that you referred also to the secretary who was participating in our conference this morning. He also, of course, is chairing the structural reform ministerial meeting, which started this afternoon and goes on throughout tomorrow. And I think I mentioned earlier that it's very appropriate that the two are linked closely together, because many of the issues that services face are behind the border issues. They relate to regulation. And therefore, that's one big point. And a second big point is that unlike trade in manufactured goods, which tend to be negotiated between trade ministers and their officials, services are regulated or controlled by many different ministries. So it is a much more complex series of steps that needs to be taken to liberalize. Of course, one key point is a mindset change, and for a country or an economy to realize that having open and competitive services, even if sometimes that means disadvantaging some existing vested interests, is actually good for the economy as a whole. It's good for other sectors of the economy, and it's good for a country's consumers. But that is an important mindset change, which some economies can reach quite easily, and others find harder. Jane.
Well, regulation is not necessarily always a bad thing. Regulation is a necessary thing. It's for governments regulate for all sorts of public policy reasons which make sense. Now, in the services sector, there is actually more regulation than in the goods sectors. Now, one of the reasons for this is you can't always see services. They have this quality of being invisible. That means the consumer can't always know before consuming them whether they're safe, whether they are of quality, and so governments intervene to ensure all sorts of quality controls. The trouble is that every regulation imposes a compliance cost on the services provider. Now, that cost that exists certainly for everybody, but if the regulation is more burdensome than it need to be, then SMEs in particular are having their whole cost structures inflated, and that makes it more difficult to operate. So it's very important that regulators make sure that their regulations are efficient, not duplicative, not overly burdensome. And we all know how strangled we can be by red tape. There is often more than one ministry involved, more than one agency. There's very rarely a regulatory one-stop that you can go to. We heard today from one of the Philippine architects that he had to get 31 signatures, 31 approvals to build a building. 31, that's at least 31 different visits to different agencies and 31 days to do it. And what we find is that if governments can learn to cooperate around what is best practice regulation, that we might be able to find ways of achieving all of those public policy objectives and yet reducing the cost of trading. And I think that is why industry is so interested in this regulatory agenda going forward.
Other questions? No more? Okay, with
Kathy?
yes, please, from
Kathy,
Inquirer.
may I
Peter,
just,
please.
just
Yes,
add, no? I think for the Philippine setting, it's high time that we realize that if we want to keep sending our people to work abroad, we've got to learn as well to accept professionals, workers from other countries into the country. It's a long shot, I know. We have associations that we will have to deal with. And I think that's the role of the Philippine Services Coalition precisely. We want to engage with the architects. We want to engage with the other professionals, maybe the doctors. I don't know about the lawyers, but we will try to engage our different associations in dialogue so that precisely we can better understand and come to an understanding of how we can move forward in the services agenda, bring down some of these barriers. It's going to be a long, drawn-out discussion and dialogue, but that's precisely why we feel that we need a very strong services coalition here.
Mr. Perfecto, that was precisely the question I was supposed to ask in the Philippine setting, because we are protecting a lot of our services or labor, a lot of types of jobs here in the country. So, what specific or what concrete actions do you think could be done? For example, in terms of the foreign investment negative list, perhaps, or in the Constitution, I don't know. But what could be your recommendations?
Well, I'm sure you're familiar, diba, that the Philippine Business Group's Joint Foreign Chambers has always been talking about the FINL, and we've been talking about removing some of a number of these restrictions. No? I'm not sure if Kathy can confirm this, but up until now, ice making is something reserved for Filipinos. And by the way, ice making is not just about ice. No, that impacts on banquet services, hotels, restaurants, etc. All of these different kinds of services. But the point is, many of those included in this list are from the 1920s, 1930s. So we really have, but I think the reason why we're not moving forward is there's a lack of an understanding as a nation where we want to go, how we want to do this, how we want to get involved globally, how we want to take advantage of the opportunities of globalization. It's not clear. It's not clear the same way it's clear, for example, to a taxi driver in Singapore who knows that he has to take care of his tourist passengers because he knows that he is part of their agenda. We've been saying this many times before. It's very important that the Philippines has a vision, has a roadmap, has clear roadmaps. That's why we're also pushing for roadmaps in the different industries. Alam mo, I think the way to move forward on that is not to bang our heads on the walls, but rather to engage more and more of our organizations, our stakeholders in dialogue. And it will take some time, but I do believe we will get there. And we need a strong services coalition and tapping into the strengths of the different service coalitions in the region, learn from them, look at best practice, and try to exercise maybe the ghosts of genuine liberalization or that's stopping us from enjoying the benefits.
Just very quickly, it could be a very delicate issue given Filipinos very sensitive, sentimental. So do you think we can push it forward?
It will take time. I've been saying it will take time, but we have already seen that it's not impossible. We have worked with associations before that initially were very much against. Many groups, with the AEC, for example, many groups were saying we're not ready for this, etc. But because of the dialogue that government and the private sector initiated, a number of them are saying, oh, right, there are opportunities here. It's not just about threats. There are a lot of opportunities. And so now you hear a lot of the industry a lot of even the regional business groups talking about innovation, because now they realize, oh, that's the key. We've got to innovate. We've got to grow. We've got to move out of these protectionist shells that we've created for ourselves. But yes, it's going to take time.
I had the privilege of joining an orientation program and a consultation with the professional boards. This was just 2 weeks ago. I was with Manny Esgara of NEDA and Perry, Asek Perry of DTI. And we were able to attend that consultation with members of the professional boards that was organized by the Professional Regulation Commission. And initially, I thought it would be a tough task for us to convince them that services is it. But at the end of the orientation, which is about midday, prior to lunch, we asked for their sentiment, and they said, "Yeah, sure, we will cooperate. We are willing to open up. We are willing to issue the certifications necessary, of course, with very reasonable requirements." But I think there's a mind shift happening at the moment. I've never seen that before, but 2 weeks ago, I saw that shift in the perspective of the members of the professional boards. In reality, we have mutual recognition arrangements in place already. So it's not like this is something new. It's just an issue of enforcing it. And it's because certain professional boards are just not willing to make it easy and simple. That's why we've not been able to enforce these MRAs. But these are all in place. The gentleman, please, in front.
Hi, I actually live here, even though I don't look like it. My name's Brad Redderson. I'm working on behalf of Cebu Daily News for the purposes of this question, but I come from Silicon Valley, so I have a lot of knowledge of some of the things you're talking about. The question I was going to ask, it may be a little premature, but it has to do with the whole idea of the services sector and value adding. And I'm referring specifically to some of the movements that have been going on in other countries in the region. Singapore, for example, actively seeking investment from foreign countries only if it raises the capabilities and capacity of the individuals in the region, rather than just being cheap labor, that they now have more added value as labor. In Indonesia, there are movements that are going on, as you well know, where there are entire industries where they're saying you can't sell here anymore unless you manufacture here in order to be able to do that. And in the Philippines, there was a 2013 World Bank report which said, and I'm loosely translating, one of the things the Philippines needs to stop doing is to advertise itself as a place that can do the same things everybody else can, but cheaper. And they need to recognize that their innovation, their intellectual capabilities, and all that is important. I haven't heard anybody in any of the discussions today talking about moving up in the value chain. It's been more about regulation, openness, transparency, those sort of things. Is there any of that in the plans, or is this too premature to ask?
Okay. I'd like to ask Jane first, then Anthony. Jane?
It's very much part of the thinking that is going on at official level, that is reflected in the discussion that officials are having with the business community, most certainly. The question of value of services value add, of upgrading at firm level and upgrading at economy-wide level. The problem is that the best way to do this is to attract more investment, not to attract less. So the how to do it is never straightforward, but ultimately it comes down to ensuring that the business environment is enabling. And that takes us back to the regulatory red tape issues. It takes us back to the connectivity with the regional market. It takes us back to what's happening at the border. It takes us back to standards. So ultimately, yes, you will find when the Services Cooperation Framework finally emerges, this concept of value addition is deeply behind it. But the question is, how do you do it? And the answer that I think is reflected in everything I have seen in the public-private dialogue process is to do with openness, not closedness, and in particular being open to new ideas, new talent, to data, to more interaction with each other, not less.
Anthony?
I just add a couple of quick points. I actually, in discussions on not just on the services, but in things like the connectivity working group, which I chair inside ABAC, the digital and internet economy and connectivity is a critical subject. And actually, it's also a very interesting one from a regulatory point of view, because it's so new and different aspects of it, both the e-commerce, e-retail side, and the whole question of data flows, privacy, security. A lot of complex issues come there, so it becomes a kind of subject in its own right. I'm not sure that anybody has all the answers to yet as to how that is going to be best regulated, because of course, as was said in another context, we can't sort of wish regulation away entirely. As I said earlier today, they're like death and taxes. They're part of the human condition. But we will have to, we and governments will have to sort of work very, very carefully to try and make sure that we get appropriate regulation in that whole high-tech internet digital space, and not put in barriers to it expanding. The other comment I would make is the one that agreeing completely with your sentiment of a wish for, countries have a wish to move up the value chain. One way of doing that, two ways of doing it, but they're two sides of the same coin, is to be very open to foreign investment. And the second is to be very open to allowing foreign talent. This picks up a point that Peter was making earlier. And obviously a place like Singapore is a first-class example. They've always hugely encouraged import of foreign talent, particularly highly qualified. At the moment, they're worrying a bit with about some of their lower skilled labor, though they still have a huge amount that comes from overseas. But they and many other economies are very open to employing the best talent from abroad in those sort of areas to help upgrade local capabilities.
Okay. We'll entertain the last question before they proceed to another function. Anyway, Anthony will still be here tomorrow, as well as Jane will be at Radisson for meetings. And Peter, will you still be around tomorrow? So you can reach them tomorrow, just in case you have additional questions. So any last question for tonight? No more? Thank you so much.
Thank you.